Welcome back to another episode of the Speak Real podcast. I'm Sumaira and I'm here with a very special guest today, Alison.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Samira.
Of course, thank you so much for being here. And just before we get started, the Speak Real podcast over here, we just try to have one-on-one conversations with our youth speakers talking about really important topics like mental health, anxiety, depression, substance use, and just a wide range and hearing the journey that they've been through. So we're just going to get started, and I want to ask you a question just as an icebreaker. So if you could describe yourself in one word, Alison, what would that word be?
That's so hard to think about, but I would say, honestly, at this point in my life, I've really worked on being a loving person. And so I would say loving. I can identify as a loving person at this point. So, yeah.
That's amazing. I love that word. It's very positive, and it does show as well in just your presence.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And so why don't you just start off by telling me a bit about your story and just the journey that you've been through?
For sure. So, just like everyone, right? Everyone has their own story. I guess mine starts when I was in elementary school, like elementary school, it's looking back now, it was a long time ago, but elementary school was a really transformative time in my life. I found out my dad was diagnosed with cancer when I was 10. So that's like grade 5, right? I think it's grade 5. And I remember that being really, really difficult for me. I remember not knowing what to do about that. I remember being afraid. But even though he was diagnosed for the first time then, he was able to go back to work, and he had a surgery and did some radiation, I think, some treatments. And so I just continued on with my life. I kept going to school. But the effect that had on my self-esteem was significant, and I didn't really realize that until many years later, because at that point in time there wasn't really many kids at all. There was not really any conversations at all around cancer, and so you didn't really know many people in your life who had someone with the illness. And I remember feeling like I was one of a few kids at the school that had a parent or family member that was sick. And so I just remember feeling like everything that I was doing was kind of, watched, if that makes sense, right? Because I was one of those kids with the sick parent. And so I remember I was finally in grade 8, like just so excited to start a new chapter in my life, go on to high school. At that point in time, my dad was doing a lot better. And yeah, I was just like completely ready for this fresh start. But I remember, I think it was about a month before my grade 8 graduation, my dad unfortunately got re-diagnosed with cancer. And this time it had actually become what they call terminal. So there's no real solution or thing that they can do for him.
Mhm.
And so I just remember being like, oh my gosh, I finally feel secure with who I am. This story about me and my family has been long gone for a few years, and all of a sudden it's coming back up. So I was like, really, like, why did this have to happen? Like, I don't know, I just didn't know how to cope with that. And up until that point in my life, watching mostly my dad specifically deal with conflicts that have come up in our lives, it was more of like, okay, let's just, not talk about it. Like, okay, that happened, but we're not going to talk about that, if that makes sense. So I grew up thinking that, emotions were kind of a weakness, a little bit of a vulnerability. So I never wanted to express my true feelings. I never felt really safe to do that. And so when my dad got sick again, I was going off to this new school. Uh, you know, in a new neighborhood with new friends, and I just pretended like it wasn't happening. And that had a huge impact on my mental and emotional health, right? Because you're kind of holding everything inside. And so it was a few years later when my dad actually passed away. I was in grade 11, I was 16, and I really realized the effects that holding everything in had on my mental health. I was extremely anxious, really anxious the whole time he was sick, but anxious even afterwards. I experienced some severe depression mixed in with the grief, but I really just found myself in a really bad place. And
Mhm.
so that was kind of the point in my life where I decided that, with some help, that what had happened in my past didn't have to define the future that I wanted to have for myself, right? And so after that, I started to do some self work. I pursued education in more holistic psychology, psychotherapy, and more psychology as well as something called neuro-linguistic programming, which is a behavioral cognitive behavioral therapy very similar to CBT. And so that, painful situation, that big loss really ultimately turned into the purpose in the work that I do now. And so I'm lucky enough to work with young adults and youth, really people of all ages, helping them get really those emotional education pieces that we don't learn in school, nobody teaches us, right? And just get into the driver's seat of their life again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank
Mhm.
you so much for sharing that. I can't imagine being 5 years old and having to go through so much trauma
Mhm.
throughout the years. And I can also resonate with the fact that you don't want to be defined by
Mhm.
some of the worst moments and feelings in your life. So,
Yeah. Well,
uh,
thank you.
yeah, so it makes a lot of sense, and I wanted to just ask, like, was there any specific moment in which that led you to think that I need help right now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was many,
Mhm.
but, we don't always act on those moments, right? Because the voice in my head at the time was, it's not safe for you to show your emotions, to communicate how you're feeling. Um, and I also felt like nobody would understand, right? So
Mm,
I held myself back from getting the help that I needed, and then I made it pretty much worse for myself, which unfortunately a lot of us do, right? Right. But yeah, the defining moment of all of that for me was when I finally realized. I remember I was sitting in my room. I was painting actually. I still do some art. Just whatever comes out, really, not anything nice. But I remember painting and just like kind of having a conversation with God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. I'm not really a religious person, but I've always felt like, there's a bit of like someone looking out for me, a higher power, that kind of thing. And I remember just being like, why? Like, why did you take my dad from me? Like, and then I realized, like, just because my dad had died didn't mean that I had to metaphorically. Like, it wasn't my life that ended, it was his. And at that moment, I realized, like, I wasn't really living. Like, I was living, but I wasn't, like, actively enjoying what I was doing. And at the time, I think I was 16, 17. And, high school is already hard enough.
yeah.
But I remember being like, okay, like, I need to get some support. I need to put me first now. And so that was the moment where I decided that really I was going to rewrite the story and not remember my dad in a sad way, or do my best to continue on with my life and have him in my life, just not remembering him, and being sad forever, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so empowering. And that line you said that yourself not dying through the process
Yeah.
and choosing yourself in it, and that's a very powerful thing. And in that moment, like, what are some of the steps that you did take to achieve that help and reach out?
For sure. I remember I had someone at the time that basically would come in and say like, hey, I'm here for you if you need it, and I'd be like, no, I'm good. Right, I'm good. And so oftentimes that's our parents. For me it was a family friend, and I just remember reaching out and saying, you know what, um I do want some support, I do want to talk. And at that point I was actually connected with I think a bereavement counselor through an organization. And so I started to talk with her. I started to go to group therapy. I started to, do some coaching. So I started to do many different things, and I still do all of those things today. But there was one person that really stood out to me and was there for me, and kind of just like this angel that, I didn't know I needed, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
yeah, and so how have those experiences in your life just kind of affected you today, even?
Yeah, I definitely think that, we go through things, and we there's definitely been things in my life that have reminded me of the way that I felt during those times. It's almost like um yeah, like when I was younger, when I was experiencing anxiety and depression, significantly, and there was a lot of things out of my control. Obviously I knew what that felt like, and how nice or not nice I was being to myself. And so as I continued to grow, I remember kind of where I came from, if that makes sense. Like, I still have my off days, obviously, we're all human. Um, but I think that looking at the evidence of really how far you've come, is really, really helpful, because oftentimes we forget to do that. And we're like, well, this is where I'm going and I'm not there yet, right? And so I would say that what I went through has helped me in that sense. Like, I'm always appreciative of what I did for myself, especially asking for help, because that was like the defining moment of really what got me here, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. And I think that's so important to just kind of remind yourself of those moments. And because when you do have those feelings again, it can make you feel like you've just taken so many steps backward.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's hard to kind of see the overall picture where it's like I am growing, I am
Mhm.
achieving kind of more balance, but it's that one thing sometimes that kind of makes you feel kind of go down on yourself. So that's a really great piece of advice, just even noticing what you did for yourself back then, the negative language that we talk to ourselves with, and
Mhm.
letting ourselves be okay even now when we feel negative.
Yeah, absolutely.
For myself, I remember when I was going through more difficult times, I always wanted to be this person in the past, the person that was happy, and this idea I had of myself that it was hard for me to accept the person that I was.
Right.
And it was just that in your head, you can turn yourself into such a villain.
Mhm.
So it's so important to just remind yourself that it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and now I want to ask you that, like, how have these experiences been affecting you right now in the current pandemic? Have they kind of increased? Are there any coping tools that you've kind of had to tap back into right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, because a lot of my upbringing was out of my control, when situations are out of my control that come up, I experience usually a little bit of anxiety, right? Like everybody. But specifically for me, COVID was one of those times I felt, like almost a grieving process, in a sense of things that I had, scheduled for myself. I was about to do all of these amazing things, and obviously, just like everyone else, schedule changed. I was about to go away, had to cancel that. But I found myself, it really, for me, it wasn't about COVID. It was about how COVID made me feel, right?
Mm.
And I felt like things were out of my control. I felt anxious. Um, and yeah, I absolutely felt some grief come up because grief is like, as you know, a mixture of all kinds of different things. And I really had to give myself some time and some space to allow those emotions to flow because I think that, most of the time when we're emotional, we tend to just want to be okay again, right? And it's when we neglect those emotions and we avoid them where they actually get stuck. So I really had to spend some time allowing myself to feel sad or allowing myself to feel the grief of the things that I wouldn't be experiencing, right? Um, so yeah, I'm definitely in a lot better place, but I definitely remember like the first week of COVID, I was like, what is happening, right? So yeah.
Yeah, definitely for me as well. Just acceptance is so key
Yeah.
to that, and just allowing yourself to feel those emotions again. Such a difficult thing, especially for
Mhm.
such uncertain times.
Yeah,
That definitely it does take that process.
for
So
sure.
yeah, for me it took a couple months. I think I would be like, I'm okay now, and then just the next month it's like I'm not okay.
Yeah, it's like a new normal, right? And the other thing too is nobody had the answers. That was kind of freaking me out. I'm like, okay, well, one person's saying this and then other people are saying this. And yeah, it's just kind of acceptance was a huge part of it for me. And kind of growing into this new normal, right?
Mhm.
And being okay with the uncertainty and just literally living sometimes day to day or hour to hour, right? So
Yeah, definitely taking each day at a time.
yeah.
And now I want to ask you one more question just about your story, which is if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Oh, I would say, well, I started this by saying that I identify as a loving person. I never would say that about myself before. I because I was so afraid of losing love, I didn't actually allow myself to experience it, and I was very hesitant with the people that I gave that to because with my dad, I've had a number of other losses, um, and so I would feel like now I would love to be able to tell myself at that age or go back and just remind myself that it's okay to open your heart and it's okay to let love in, and trust that it will be there because I think sometimes we hold ourselves back from fully being present or fully expressing, love in whatever means because we're afraid of whatever. And I know that was the case for me.
hmm that's a really amazing piece of advice, Allison. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I also want to get to know some of the projects that you've been currently working on. I know I've seen a couple of them, but yeah, so if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I basically have been working in my own business for a couple of years now. And when COVID hit, I was like, okay, I guess I'm going online. It wasn't something that I ever considered doing before. But, since last year, I've been running a youth program called Resources for Resilience with a co facilitator. We brought that online, and that's a 5-week program. It's amazing. I've also done a couple other month to 5-week programs online, really about giving youth and young adults those emotional education pieces, those life skills, the mindset, emotional intelligence, sometimes even energetics too, right? All the things that we really are not taught in school and just tools that we can take on for the rest of our lives. So I've been really focusing on that. And then, working one on one with individuals as well has been amazing. I'm really just grateful that I kind of took that chance on myself
Mhm.
and pivoted as you speak did as well, doing things online. definitely is a little bit vulnerable, but yeah, I've had some amazing feedback, and thank you for that comment. It's so nice to, be able to share that. It's definitely been, it's kind of like a mountain with no peak almost sometimes. um, but yeah, it's been amazing to be able to share those tools and resources with people, and so they can really,
Mhm.
take control of their lives, and not be. I know for me, I absolutely loved the therapy and coaching that I did, but I really, really wanted the tools that I could take away and do things for myself. So that's kind of how I do my coaching sessions and my online programs.
That sounds like such an important initiative to have because,
Mhm.
as you said, we don't get that at school right now, and it's
Mhm.
so important to teach kids emotional resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm
Thank you.
excited for you for
Thank
everything
you.
into your future, and thank you so much for being here and sharing everything with us
Thanks for
today.
having me. It's been so nice to connect with you.
And I also want to thank you all for tuning in today for the Speak Real podcast. We have an episode each Thursday, and if you want to help support our Youth by Youth initiatives, you can go to youthspeak.ca where you can donate. And I want to give one special shout out to the TD Bank Group for helping us launch our online programming. Well, we'll see you next time. Bye.